The morning sun cast long shadows across the Coronado Naval Base as Lieutenant Sarah Chen walked through the gates for what would become the most defining week of her military career. At 28, she had already earned her place as one of the Army's most skilled snipers, but today she was entering entirely new territory. The Navy SEALs had reluctantly agreed to let her participate in their advanced marksmanship evaluation program, though the word reluctantly barely captured the resistance she had faced. Sarah's boots clicked against the asphalt as she made her way toward the training facility. Her compact frame, standing just 5 feet 4 inches tall, drew immediate attention from the group of SEALs gathered near the entrance. She could hear their conversations pause as she approached, replaced by the kind of whispered comments she had grown accustomed to throughout her 8-year military career. "That's her?" came a voice from behind her. "The Army's so-called Wonder Woman?" Another SEAL, a massive man with arms like tree trunks, chuckled. "My little sister's bigger than that. What's she gonna do, hide behind a blade of grass?" Sarah kept her expression neutral, though her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. She had heard variations of these comments countless times before. Her small stature, combined with her Asian heritage and gender, made her an easy target for those who believed that military excellence came only in packages that looked like them. Chief Petty Officer Marcus Rodriguez emerged from the building, clipboard in hand. At 42, Rodriguez was a legend among SEALs, with over 2 decades of service and more combat deployments than most people had birthdays. His weathered face showed the kind of experience that came from surviving situations where others hadn't. When he spotted Sarah, his expression remained professionally neutral, though she caught the slight tightening around his eyes. "Lieutenant Chen," Rodriguez called out. "You're here for the marksmanship evaluation?" "Yes, Chief," Sarah replied, her voice clear and steady. Rodriguez looked her up and down, taking in her Army combat uniform and the various qualification badges adorning her chest. His gaze lingered on her expert marksmanship badge and the Special Forces tab that marked her as one of the few women to complete the Army's most demanding training programs. "I'll be honest with you, Lieutenant," Rodriguez said, lowering his voice slightly. "I fought hard against this. Not because you're a woman, not because you're Army, but because this evaluation was designed for our guys. It's not some feel-good exercise or photo opportunity. This is serious business." Sarah met his gaze directly. "I understand, Chief. I didn't request any special treatment, and I don't expect any." Behind Rodriguez, the group of SEALs had grown larger. Sarah counted at least 15 men, all of them watching this exchange with obvious interest. She recognized the type immediately: elite operators who had earned their positions through incredible dedication and sacrifice. Their skepticism wasn't necessarily personal, it was protective. They had seen too many people who couldn't measure up when lives were on the line. Petty Officer First Class Jake Sullivan stepped forward from the group. At 6 feet 2 inches and built like a linebacker, Sullivan had the kind of presence that commanded attention. His arms were crossed, and his expression made it clear that he viewed Sarah's presence as an unwelcome distraction. "Chief, with all due respect," Sullivan said, his southern accent thick with disdain, "we've got real work to do here. This isn't summer camp. These evaluations determine who gets selected for operations where there's zero margin for error." Rodriguez held up a hand. "The decision's been made, Sullivan. Lieutenant Chen is here, and she'll participate just like everyone else." Sullivan's laugh was harsh. "Come on, Chief, look at her. She's probably, 120 pounds soaking wet? Half our gear weighs more than she does. This is just some Pentagon diversity initiative." The comment stung, but Sarah had learned long ago that reacting to such provocations only validated them. Instead, she simply stood at attention, waiting for Rodriguez to continue. Her calm demeanor seemed to irritate Sullivan even more. "You know what?" Sullivan continued, warming to his theme. I bet she's never even been in a real firefight. Probably spent her whole career at some cushy training facility, teaching recruits how to hold a rifle. This time, one of the other SEALs, Petty Officer Second Class David Kim, spoke up. Sullivan, ease up. Let's at least see what she can do before we write her off. Sullivan turned on Kim with obvious irritation. Oh, what? You're gonna defend her because she's Asian like you? This isn't about race or gender, Kim. It's about capability. And there's no way someone that size can handle what we do. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. Sarah could feel all eyes on her, waiting to see how she would respond to Sullivan's increasingly aggressive comments. She had faced similar situations before, but never quite this openly hostile. The SEAL's reputation for brotherhood and loyalty was legendary, but clearly that protection didn't extend to outsiders. Rodriguez stepped between Sullivan and Sarah. That's enough, Sullivan. Lieutenant Chen's qualifications got her here, not politics. Her record speaks for itself. What record? Sullivan shot back. Army marksmanship competitions? Shooting paper targets at known distances? This isn't the Olympics, Chief. This is life and death. Sarah finally spoke, her voice calm but carrying an edge of steel. Petty Officer Sullivan, you're absolutely right. This isn't the Olympics. In the Olympics, you don't have enemy snipers shooting back at you while you're trying to make a shot at 800 meters in a sandstorm. The comment drew surprised looks from several of the SEALs. Sullivan's expression darkened. You think you've seen combat, sweetheart? Real combat. 3 deployments to Afghanistan, Sarah replied evenly. 73 confirmed kills. Longest successful shot, 147 meters, all while attached to Special Forces units conducting direct action missions. The number hung in the air like a challenge. Even Sullivan seemed taken aback by the specificity of her response. In the sniper community, confirmed kills weren't something you lied about or exaggerated. The paperwork was too detailed, and the verification process too rigorous. Rodriguez checked his clipboard, clearly wanting to move things along. All right, people, we've got a schedule to keep. Lieutenant Chen, you'll be participating in all phases of the evaluation alongside our candidates. The course is designed to test not just marksmanship, but tactical thinking, adaptability, and performance under extreme stress. He gestured toward the group of SEALs. You'll be competing against 12 of our best marksmen. These men have all completed advanced sniper training and have extensive combat experience. The evaluation consists of 3 phases over 5 days. Phase 1 focuses on precision shooting at various ranges and conditions. Phase 2 involves tactical scenarios and target identification. Phase 3... Rodriguez paused, looking directly at Sarah. Phase 3 is something we call the Crucible. It's designed to break people. Sullivan snorted. Well, that shouldn't take long. Rodriguez ignored the comment and continued. Equipment check is in 30 minutes. You'll be issued a standard M110 rifle, which I assume you're familiar with? Sarah nodded. The M110 semi-automatic sniper system was a weapon she knew intimately. She had put thousands of rounds downrange with various versions of the platform. After equipment check, we'll move to the range for initial zero and basic accuracy assessment. This isn't pass or fail at this point. It's just to establish baseline capabilities. As Rodriguez spoke, Sarah became aware that the initial hostility from the group was beginning to shift into something more complex. Her mention of combat experience and confirmed kills had introduced an element of uncertainty into their assumptions. These men were professionals, and regardless of their personal feelings, they recognized and respected genuine combat credentials. Petty Officer Second Class. Tom Mitchell, a quiet man who had been observing the entire exchange, stepped forward. Lieutenant, what unit were you attached to in Afghanistan? 5th Special Forces Group primarily, Sarah replied. Some work with 10th Group as well. Most of my deployments were spent embedded with ODA teams conducting village stability operations and direct action raids. Mitchell nodded slowly. Operational Detachment Alpha teams were the core of Special Forces operations, and any sniper good enough to be attached to them had to be exceptional. The fact that she had worked with multiple teams suggested that her reputation had spread within the Special Forces community. "Who was your team leader on those deployments?" Mitchell asked, his tone more respectful now. "Captain James Morrison for my first 2 deployments, then Captain David Fisher for the 3rd. Mitchell's eyebrows shot up. "You worked with Dave Fisher? I know Dave. Good man. Tough as nails." "He is," Sarah agreed. "He's the one who recommended me for this evaluation." The revelation that a respected Special Forces officer had personally recommended Sarah caused a visible shift in the group's dynamic. Captain Fisher was known throughout the Special Operations community as someone who didn't suffer fools and had no patience for political correctness when lives were on the line. Sullivan, however, wasn't ready to back down. "So you've got good references. That doesn't mean you can hang with us. The Army and Navy operate differently. What passes for acceptable in your world might not cut it in ours." Rodriguez finally lost patience with Sullivan's attitude. "Sullivan, if you've got this much energy to burn, why don't you volunteer to be Lieutenant Chen's shooting partner for the evaluation? Put your skills where your mouth is." The suggestion clearly surprised Sullivan, but backing down now would make him look weak in front of his teammates. "Fine by me, Chief, but I don't want any complaints when this turns into a teaching moment instead of a competition." Sarah felt a small smile tug at the corner of her mouth. She had encountered men like Sullivan throughout her career, skilled operators whose confidence sometimes crossed the line into arrogance. They weren't necessarily bad people, but they had never been forced to question their assumptions about what effective operators looked like. "I appreciate the offer, Petty Officer Sullivan," Sarah said politely. "I'm sure I'll learn a lot from the experience." Her response, delivered with perfect military courtesy, somehow managed to make Sullivan's bluster seem petty and unprofessional. Several of the other SEALs exchanged glances, recognizing the subtle way she had turned his aggression against him without ever crossing the line into disrespect. Rodriguez clapped his hands together. "All right, that settles it. Sullivan and Chen will be partners for the evaluation. Everyone else, find your assigned partners and get ready for equipment check. We start in 25 minutes. As the group began to disperse, Sarah found herself walking alongside Kim toward the equipment building. The Korean-American SEAL had been one of the few to speak up in her defense, and she was curious about his perspective. "Don't take Sullivan personally," Kim said quietly. "He's actually a good operator and a decent guy when he's not feeling threatened. But he's from a small town in Georgia where women didn't serve in combat roles, and change doesn't come easy to him." Sarah nodded. "I've dealt with his type before. The thing is, I don't blame him for being skeptical. If I were in his position, I might feel the same way. These guys have earned their reputation through blood and sacrifice. From their perspective, I'm an unknown quantity walking into their world." Kim looked surprised by her response. "You're being pretty generous. He was pretty harsh back there." "Maybe," Sarah said, "but harsh isn't the same as wrong. I am smaller than everyone else here. I am an outsider, and if I can't prove that I belong here, then their skepticism was justified." They reached the equipment building, where Gunner's Mate First Class Roberto Santos was overseeing the weapons distribution. Santos, a compact man in his late 30s, looked up as Sarah approached. "Lieutenant Chen, I've got your rifle ready. M1910A1 factory fresh. What's your preferred optic?" "Leupold Mark IV, if you have it," Sarah replied. "I'm comfortable with the Night Force AT-ACR as well." Santos nodded approvingly. "Good choices. I've got a Mark IV mounted and bore-sighted. You'll want to confirm your 0, obviously, but it should get you close." He handed her the rifle case and a box containing additional equipment: bipod, sling, cleaning kit, and several boxes of match-grade ammunition. The weapon was beautiful, a precision instrument that represented the cutting edge of military sniper technology. Sarah opened the case and lifted the rifle, feeling its familiar weight in her hands. The M110A1 was an evolution of the weapon she had carried through 3 combat deployments, and handling it felt like greeting an old friend. "Nice setup," she murmured, running her hands over the rifle's components. The trigger had been professionally adjusted, the barrel was free-floating, and the optic mount was perfectly aligned. Santos watched her examine the weapon with obvious expertise. "You know your way around that platform." "I should hope so," Sarah replied. "I've probably put 15,000 rounds downrange with various M110 variants." "Combat rounds or training?" Santos asked. "Both. About 60-40 split, with the majority being combat rounds." Santos whistled softly. 15,000 rounds was a significant number for any sniper, but having the majority be combat rounds suggested extensive operational experience. Most snipers, even excellent ones, fired far more training rounds than combat rounds throughout their careers. Sullivan approached, carrying his own rifle case. He had overheard the conversation about Sarah's experience, and his expression showed he was beginning to take her more seriously. 15,000 rounds? Sullivan asked. "Over how many years?" 8 years of active service, Sarah replied. "But the majority were concentrated in my 3 deployment years." Sullivan did the math in his head. Even spread over 3 years, that represented an extraordinary amount of combat engagement for a single sniper. Either she was exaggerating, or she had seen more action than most SEALs. Rodriguez reappeared, now dressed in range gear. "All right, people, let's move to the range. We're starting with basic accuracy assessment at 300, 500, and 800 meters. 3-round groups at each distance. Best 2 groups count toward your overall score." The group began moving toward the firing range, a sophisticated facility that offered multiple distance options and various environmental challenges. As they walked, Sarah noticed that the earlier hostility had been replaced by a more complex mixture of skepticism and curiosity. Her professional responses and documented combat experience had earned her a measure of provisional respect, but she knew that respect would be meaningless if she couldn't perform when it mattered. The range itself was impressive, stretching out over 100-200 meters with target positions at regular intervals. Wind flags dotted the course, showing the complex air currents that would affect long-range shots. Mountains in the distance created thermal effects that would challenge even experienced shooters. Rodriguez pointed to the firing positions. "Lieutenant Chen, you'll be shooting from position 12. Sullivan, you're in position 11, right next to her. Everyone else, take your assigned positions." As Sarah set up her shooting position, she could feel eyes on her from across the range. The SEALs had spread out to their various positions, but several were clearly watching to see how she handled herself in this initial phase. She extended the rifle's bipod and adjusted it for the uneven ground, then settled into a comfortable prone position behind the weapon. The familiar routine of preparing for a shot helped calm her nerves and focus her mind. This was what she had trained for, what she had done successfully in combat dozens of times. Looking through the scope, she could see the 300-meter target clearly. The wind was minimal at this distance, and the lighting conditions were ideal. This should be the easiest part of the evaluation. Rodriguez's voice carried across the range. "All shooters, you have 15 minutes to complete your 3-round groups at 300 meters. Begin when ready." Sarah took a deep breath and settled into her shooting position. The next few minutes would begin to determine whether she belonged here or whether Sullivan's skepticism was justified. Either way, there was no turning back now. Sarah's breathing settled into the familiar rhythm she had perfected over thousands of combat hours. In through the nose hold, out through the mouth, each exhale timed to the natural pause between heartbeats. The world around her faded away until only the target existed in her consciousness. Her first shot broke clean, the rifle's recoil pushing back into her shoulder with familiar authority. Through the scope, she watched the bullet impact exactly where she had aimed, dead center of the target's X-ring. She cycled the bolt smoothly and settled back into position. The second shot followed 10 seconds later, impacting less than half an inch from the first. The third shot completed a group so tight that from 300 meters, it looked like a single ragged hole in the center of the target. Sullivan, shooting in the position next to her, had fired his 3 shots in rapid succession. His group was excellent by any standard, all 3 shots within a 2-inch circle, but Sarah's group was noticeably smaller. "Time," Rodriguez called out. "All shooters, make your weapons safe and prepare to move to the 500-meter line." As the shooters began transitioning to the longer range, Santos walked downrange with a spotting scope to mark the groups. When he reached Sarah's target, he stopped and called back to Rodriguez. "Chief, you need to see this." Rodriguez jogged downrange and took the spotting scope from Santos. After examining Sarah's target, he let out a low whistle. "What is it, Chief?" called out Petty Officer Mitchell from the firing line. 3-round group measures .75 inches, Rodriguez replied, his voice carrying clearly across the range. "At 300 meters. A murmur ran through the group of SEALs. .75 inches at 300 meters represented exceptional accuracy, the kind of shooting that separated true marksmen from merely competent ones. Sullivan frowned as he looked at his own group through binoculars. "What's my measurement, Chief?" 2.1 inches, Rodriguez called back, "still well within standards." But the comparison was obvious to everyone. Sarah's group was nearly 3 times smaller than Sullivan's, despite using an unfamiliar rifle on an unfamiliar range. The feat was even more impressive given the pressure she was under as the only outsider in the group. As they moved to the 500-meter line, the complexity of the shooting increased significantly. The longer range meant that environmental factors like wind and temperature would have much greater effects on bullet trajectory. Additionally, the targets at this distance appeared much smaller through the scope, requiring greater precision in aiming. Kim set up in the position next to Sarah for this phase. "Nice shooting at 300, he said quietly. "That group would be impressive at 100 meters, let alone 300. "Thank you," Sarah replied, adjusting her position for the longer shot. "The rifle Santos set up is really well tuned. That makes all the difference." Through her scope, Sarah studied the 500-meter target while observing the wind flags positioned along the range. The breeze was variable, shifting between 3 and 7 miles per hour from different angles. Reading wind correctly would be crucial for success at this distance. She also noticed something else. The other shooters were beginning to watch her more closely. What had started as casual dismissal had evolved into genuine curiosity about her capabilities. The pressure was building, and she could feel the weight of their expectations. "All shooters," Rodriguez announced, "you have 20 minutes for your 3-round groups at 500 meters. Environmental conditions are variable. Adjust accordingly." Sarah took her time with the first shot, carefully reading the wind and adjusting her point of aim to compensate for the breeze. The bullet's flight time at this distance was long enough that wind changes during flight could affect impact significantly. Her first shot hit slightly left of center, indicating she had undercompensated for the wind. She made a mental note and adjusted her hold for the second shot. This bullet impacted in the center ring, exactly where she wanted it. For the third shot, the wind had picked up slightly. Sarah held off her point of aim a bit more and squeezed the trigger. The shot felt good, and through the scope she could see it had impacted very close to her second shot. When Santos measured her group at 500 meters, the result was even more impressive than her 300-meter performance. Despite the challenging conditions, she had managed a 1.2-inch group, a level of accuracy that represented world-class precision shooting. Sullivan's group measured 3.8 inches, which was still excellent but clearly inferior to Sarah's shooting. More importantly, Sarah's ability to read and adjust for wind had demonstrated a level of fieldcraft that couldn't be learned in classroom settings. Petty Officer Mitchell approached Sarah as they prepared to move to the 800-meter line. "Ma'am, I have to ask, what's your background with precision shooting? Because what you're doing here isn't normal." Sarah considered her response carefully. She didn't want to sound boastful, but she also understood that her credibility with these men depended on honest communication about her experience. "I was selected for Army Special Forces training straight out of advanced individual training," she explained. "Instead of following a traditional career path, I was fast-tracked into the sniper program because of my shooting scores. I've spent essentially my entire career focused on precision marksmanship." Mitchell nodded slowly. "That explains some of it, but not all of it. Plenty of people get specialized training. Not many shoot like this under pressure. Combat experience teaches you things you can't learn any other way," Sarah replied. "When missing a shot means your teammates die, you develop a different relationship with accuracy." The conversation was interrupted by Rodriguez calling for the move to 800 meters. This would be the most challenging phase of the basic accuracy assessment, requiring shooters to manage multiple complex variables while maintaining precision. At 800 meters, the targets appeared tiny through the scope, and even small errors in technique or environmental reading would result in significant misses. The wind had continued to build, creating cross-currents that varied at different points along the bullet's path. Sarah settled into her shooting position and began her pre-shot routine. She spent several minutes studying the wind flags, noting how the air movement changed at different ranges. 800 meters was far enough that the wind near the target might be significantly different from the wind at the firing position. As she prepared for her first shot, she became aware that virtually every other shooter on the line had stopped their own preparation to watch her. The pressure was intense, but it wasn't entirely unfamiliar. Some of her combat shots had been taken under similar levels of scrutiny, with team members depending on her accuracy for their survival. Her first shot at 800 meters impacted slightly high and right of center. It was still a good shot, but not the precision she had demonstrated at shorter ranges. The longer distance was beginning to reveal the limits of her ability to read environmental conditions on an unfamiliar range. She made adjustments and fired her second shot. This one impacted closer to center, but still not as precisely as she would have liked. The wind was proving more challenging than she had anticipated. For her third shot, Sarah changed her approach. Instead of trying to calculate exact wind compensation, she relied on instinct developed through thousands of field shots. She held off her aim point based on feel rather than mathematical calculation and squeezed the trigger. The bullet impacted dead center of the target, completing a respectable group despite the challenging conditions. When Santos announced her 800-meter group measurement, 2.1 inches, the range fell silent. Even accounting for the increased difficulty of the longer distance, her shooting remained extraordinarily precise. Sullivan's group at 800 meters measured 4.7 inches, still within acceptable standards, but clearly outclassed by Sarah's performance. The gap between their capabilities was becoming impossible to ignore. Rodriguez gathered all the shooters together after the basic accuracy assessment was complete. "All right, people. We're finished with Phase 1. Overall, the shooting was excellent, with several standout performances." He consulted his clipboard. "Leading the overall standings after Phase 1 is Lieutenant Chen, with groups measuring 0.75, 1.2, and 2.1 inches respectively. Second place is Petty Officer Mitchell with groups of 1.3, 2.8, and 3.9 inches. The announcement created a stir among the SEALs. Not only had Sarah outshot all of them, but she had done so by a significant margin. Her combined group size was smaller than any individual group fired by most of the other shooters. Sullivan's expression showed a mixture of surprise and grudging respect. His competitive nature was clearly bothered by being outshot, but his professionalism prevented him from making excuses. "Phase 2 begins tomorrow," Rodriguez continued. We'll be moving to tactical scenarios involving target identification, range estimation, and shooting from unconventional positions. The scenarios are designed to simulate combat conditions as closely as possible. As the group began to break up, several of the SEALs approached Sarah with questions about her technique and background. The earlier hostility had been replaced by genuine professional interest in her capabilities. Petty Officer First Class Danny White, a soft-spoken man who had been observing quietly throughout the day, was the first to speak up. "Lieutenant, I've been shooting competitively for 15 years, and I've never seen groups that tight at those distances with a factory rifle. What's your secret?" Sarah smiled. "Honestly, there's no secret. It's just thousands of hours of practice combined with good instruction early in my career. My first sniper instructor was a former Marine who had been shooting competitively before joining the military. He taught me proper fundamentals from day one." "What about your breathing technique?" asked Petty Officer Second Class Alex Torres. "I noticed you take a lot longer between shots than most people." "Combat taught me patience," Sarah replied. "When you're taking shots that really matter, rushing never helps. I'd rather take 30 seconds to set up one perfect shot than fire 3 quick shots that are only okay." The questions continued for several minutes, with Sarah patiently explaining various aspects of her shooting technique. It was clear that the SEAL's attitude toward her had fundamentally shifted. She was no longer seen as an outsider trying to prove herself, but as a skilled professional whose expertise they could learn from. Sullivan finally approached, his earlier antagonism replaced by grudging curiosity. "Lieutenant, I owe you an apology for earlier. I made assumptions that weren't fair." Sarah nodded graciously. "No apology necessary, Petty Officer Sullivan. You were protecting your team's standards, which is exactly what you should do. I would have done the same thing in your position." "Maybe," Sullivan said, "but I should have waited to see you shoot before making judgments. That was some of the best precision shooting I've ever witnessed." "Thank you," Sarah replied. "But today was just the easy part. Paper targets don't shoot back, and the range conditions were ideal. Tomorrow's scenarios will be a better test of real-world capability." Rodriguez overheard the conversation and joined the group. "Lieutenant's right. Phase 1 was about basic marksmanship fundamentals. Phase 2 is where we separate the marksmen from the snipers." He looked directly at Sarah. "Tomorrow you'll be dealing with moving targets, unknown distances, limited time frames, and physical stress. The scenarios are based on actual combat situations our teams have faced. It's designed to test not just your shooting, but your tactical thinking and ability to adapt to changing conditions." Sarah nodded. "I understand, Chief. What should I expect in terms of scenario complexity?" "Without giving too much away," Rodriguez said, "you'll be dealing with hostage situations, urban environments, and time-critical target engagement. Some scenarios will require you to make split-second decisions about whether to take a shot or hold fire. Others will test your ability to prioritize multiple targets." The description reminded Sarah of some of the most challenging missions she had faced in Afghanistan. Real combat situations were rarely as clean and straightforward as range exercises, requiring snipers to make complex decisions under extreme pressure. "How much time do we have to prepare?" asked Mitchell. "Equipment check is at 0600 tomorrow," Rodriguez replied. "Scenarios begin at 0700. You'll have access to night vision equipment, rangefinders, and tactical radios. Some scenarios will be individual. Others will require coordination with team members." As the group began to disperse, Kim walked alongside Sarah toward the parking area. "You know you've got their attention now," he said. "After today's shooting, everyone's going to be watching to see how you handle the tactical scenarios." "Good," Sarah replied. "Accuracy is important, but it's meaningless without tactical application. Tomorrow will show whether I can actually operate at their level." "I think you're going to surprise a few more people," Kim said with a grin. Sullivan looked like someone had hit him with a brick when they announced your scores. Sarah laughed. Sullivan's not a bad guy. He's just protective of his team's reputation. I can respect that, even if his initial approach was a bit rough. Speaking of Sullivan, Kim said, he specifically requested to be your partner for tomorrow's scenarios. Apparently, he wants to see how you perform in tactical situations. The news didn't surprise Sarah. Sullivan struck her as the type of operator who would want to personally verify her capabilities rather than simply accept second-hand reports. That's fine with me, she said. Partnership scenarios will give us both a chance to see how well we work together. As Sarah drove back to her temporary quarters on base, she reflected on the day's events. The shooting had gone well, better than she had hoped, actually, but she knew that tomorrow would present entirely different challenges. Tactical scenarios required not just marksmanship skills, but also situational awareness, decision-making ability, and the capacity to function under intense pressure. She had faced similar challenges in combat, but always within the familiar context of Army operations and with teammates she had trained with for months. Tomorrow, she would be operating in a Navy environment, following protocols she was less familiar with, and working alongside people who were still evaluating whether she belonged among them. The thought was both intimidating and exciting. Throughout her career, Sarah had thrived on challenges that pushed her beyond her comfort zone. Tomorrow would be another opportunity to test herself against the highest standards in the military. As she prepared for sleep that night, Sarah ran through mental rehearsals of various tactical scenarios she might face. She visualized herself moving through urban environments, identifying targets, calculating ranges, and making the split-second decisions that could mean the difference between mission success and failure. She had proven her marksmanship capabilities, but tomorrow would determine whether she could truly operate at the level of Navy SEALs. The pressure was intense, but it was also familiar. In combat, the pressure of performing under observation was always present, and she had learned to channel that energy into enhanced focus and performance. Tomorrow would reveal whether that experience translated to success in the SEAL's demanding evaluation process. The pre-dawn darkness at Coronado was broken only by the glow of red flashlights as the evaluation team prepared for the tactical scenarios. Sarah had arrived early, using the extra time to familiarize herself with the additional equipment she would need: night vision goggles, laser rangefinder, tactical radio, and various other tools that would be essential for the day's challenges. Rodriguez emerged from the operations building carrying a sealed envelope. His expression was serious, reflecting the gravity of what they were about to undertake. These scenarios weren't academic exercises. They were based on real missions where SEALs had been deployed, situations where split-second decisions determined who lived and who died. "All right, people," Rodriguez called out. "Today we move beyond basic marksmanship into tactical application. You'll be facing 5 scenarios designed to test different aspects of sniper operations. Each scenario will be scored on accuracy, decision-making, timing, and tactical awareness." He looked around the assembled group, his gaze lingering on Sarah for a moment. "Some of you will be working individually, others in partnership. The scenarios are progressive. Each one builds on the complexity of the previous challenges." Sullivan approached Sarah, his earlier antagonism completely replaced by professional focus. "Lieutenant, looks like we're partnered for scenarios 3 and 4. I've reviewed your shooting from yesterday, and I think we can work well together." Sarah nodded. "What can you tell me about the scenario types we'll be facing?" "Without spoiling the surprises," Sullivan said, "expect urban environments, time pressure, and moral complexity. These aren't simple see target, shoot target situations. You'll need to make judgment calls about rules of engagement, collateral damage, and target priority." Rodriguez opened the envelope and pulled out the first scenario briefing. "Scenario 1 is individual performance. Lieutenant Chen, you're up first." The announcement sent a ripple of tension through the group. Being selected to go first meant that Sarah would face the most scrutiny, with all the other shooters observing her performance without the benefit of seeing how others approached the challenge. Rodriguez handed her a briefing sheet. You have 5 minutes to read the scenario and ask questions. After that, you'll have 15 minutes to complete the mission. Sarah read the briefing carefully. The scenario involved a hostage situation in an urban environment. Intelligence indicated that 3 terrorists were holding 2 civilians in a building 400 meters from her position. Her mission was to eliminate the threats while ensuring the safety of the hostages. The complexity became apparent as she studied the building diagram. The terrorists were positioned in different rooms, with the hostages located in areas where poor shot placement could result in civilian casualties. Additionally, the scenario specified that the operation was taking place in a populated area where overpenetration of bullets could pose risks to innocent bystanders. Questions? Rodriguez asked. Rules of engagement? Sarah inquired. Standard ROE apply. You're authorized to engage threats, but civilian safety is paramount. Any civilian casualties result in automatic scenario failure, regardless of other performance metrics. Sarah nodded, feeling the familiar weight of responsibility that came with real-world sniper operations. In combat, she had faced similar situations where the margin for error was 0 and the consequences of mistakes were measured in human lives. Time starts now, Rodriguez announced. Sarah moved quickly to the firing position, an elevated platform that simulated a sniper's hide site overlooking the target building. Through her scope, she could see the building clearly, with windows indicating where the terrorists and hostages were located according to her briefing. The first terrorist was visible in a second-floor window, but his position made for a difficult shot. He was standing close to one of the hostages, requiring precise placement to ensure the bullet wouldn't continue through and harm the innocent person behind him. Sarah took her time, studying the angle and calculating the trajectory needed for a clean shot. She had dealt with similar situations in Afghanistan, where terrorist fighters often used human shields to complicate engagement decisions. Her first shot was carefully placed to strike the terrorist in the head, ensuring immediate incapacitation while minimizing risk to the hostage. The bullet impacted exactly where intended, and the range instructor marked the target as neutralized. The second terrorist was in a more exposed position, but the shot required her to engage through a window at an angle that left little room for error. Sarah adjusted her position slightly and fired her second shot. Another precise hit. The third terrorist presented the most challenging scenario. He was holding one of the hostages directly in front of him, using the person as a human shield. Only a small portion of his head was visible, requiring a shot that demanded absolute precision. Sarah settled into her firing position and controlled her breathing. This was the type of shot that separated competent snipers from exceptional ones. A target barely larger than a golf ball at 400 meters, with 0 margin for error. She squeezed the trigger with the same methodical precision she had used in combat. The bullet found its mark, and the instructor confirmed the successful neutralization of all 3 threats without harm to the hostages. Time, Rodriguez called out. Scenario complete. Sarah made her weapons safe and stood up from the firing position. Around her, the other SEALs who had been watching remained silent, clearly impressed by what they had witnessed. Santos, who had been serving as the range instructor, approached with his scoring sheet. All 3 targets neutralized with precision shots. No civilian casualties. Mission completion time, 11 minutes, 40 seconds. Rodriguez reviewed the scores and nodded approvingly. Outstanding performance, Lieutenant. That was textbook sniper employment in an urban environment. The second scenario involved moving targets and unknown distances designed to test a sniper's ability to adapt to changing conditions. Petty Officer Mitchell took this challenge, performing well, but not matching the efficiency that Sarah had demonstrated. When the third scenario began, Sarah found herself partnered with Sullivan for a complex mission involving multiple threats and coordinated engagement. The scenario required them to work as a sniper team, with one shooter taking designated targets, while the other provided overwatch and backup. "All right," Sullivan said as they reviewed their briefing. "This one's based on a real mission from Iraq. Multiple targets, limited time window, and civilian presence throughout the area." The scenario placed them in a simulated compound where terrorist leadership was meeting with weapons dealers. Intelligence indicated 6 high-value targets in different buildings, with civilian personnel also present in the area. The mission required simultaneous engagement to prevent the targets from escaping or communicating warnings. Sarah and Sullivan positioned themselves at different locations within the compound, with radio communication allowing them to coordinate their shots. The complexity of the scenario required not just marksmanship skills, but also tactical timing and situational awareness. "I have eyes on targets 1 and 2, Sarah reported through her radio. "Both are clear for engagement." "Copy that," Sullivan responded. "I have targets 3 and 4. Target 5 is moving between buildings. I'll take him when he stops." "Target 6 is with civilians," Sarah observed. "I need a clear shot before engaging." The tactical radio chatter between them was professional and efficient, reflecting their ability to work together despite their brief partnership. Sullivan's earlier skepticism had been completely replaced by respect for Sarah's operational capabilities. "All shooters ready?" Rodriguez's voice came through their radios. "Ready," both Sarah and Sullivan confirmed. "Execute." The coordinated engagement required split-second timing. Sarah and Sullivan fired almost simultaneously, each taking their assigned targets with precision that left no room for escape or retaliation. The scenario was completed in less than 2 minutes, with all 6 targets neutralized and 0 civilian casualties. "Outstanding," Rodriguez commented as he reviewed their performance. "That level of coordination typically requires months of training together. You two adapted remarkably quickly to each other's operating style." The fourth scenario pushed the complexity even further, involving night operations with thermal imaging equipment. Sarah and Sullivan were tasked with infiltrating a simulated terrorist camp and eliminating sentries to allow for a follow-on assault by a larger force. Working in darkness with only thermal imaging for target identification, the scenario tested every aspect of their sniper skills. They had to move silently through the course, identify threats using heat signatures, and coordinate their shots to avoid alerting other enemies in the area. Sarah's combat experience proved invaluable in this environment. Her ability to move quietly and read thermal signatures had been honed through numerous night operations in Afghanistan. She identified and engaged 3 targets while Sullivan handled 2 others, clearing the way for the simulated assault team. "Mission complete," Rodriguez announced. "All objectives achieved with 0 compromise of the assault force." The fifth and final scenario was designed to be the ultimate test, a combination of all the previous challenges with the added stress of a compressed timeline and multiple changing variables. Sarah was selected to face this challenge individually, a decision that reflected the instructor's confidence in her abilities. The scenario briefing was complex. A high-value terrorist leader was meeting with weapon suppliers in a building that was about to be evacuated. Intelligence indicated that the meeting would last only 10 minutes, after which the targets would disperse and the opportunity would be lost. Additionally, the scenario included friendly forces operating in the area, requiring Sarah to positively identify targets while avoiding blue-on-blue engagements. The stress level was intentionally designed to simulate the pressure of real combat operations, where mission success depended entirely on sniper performance. Sarah studied the briefing and moved to her firing position. Through her scope, She could see multiple individuals moving through the target building, but positive identification would require careful observation and tactical patience. The first challenge was distinguishing between the terrorist targets and innocent personnel who might be in the building. Sarah used her spotting scope to carefully observe behavior patterns, looking for indicators that would help her identify the legitimate targets. When she spotted the high-value target, he was surrounded by several other people, making engagement challenging. She had to wait for the right moment when civilian risk was minimized while ensuring she didn't miss the narrow time window for the mission. Her first shot eliminated the primary target with surgical precision. The second and third shots neutralized his associates, completing the mission objectives within the specified time limit and without any collateral damage. "Mission complete," Rodriguez announced. "All objectives achieved." As Sarah made her weapon safe and stood up from the firing position, she found herself facing a group of SEALs whose expressions had transformed completely from the skepticism she had encountered on the first day. Rodriguez approached with the final scoring sheet. "Lieutenant Chen, your performance over the past 2 days has been exceptional. You've not only met our standards, you've exceeded them in several categories." He handed her the score sheet, which showed her ranking first overall in the evaluation. Her marksmanship scores were the highest recorded, her tactical decision-making was rated as outstanding, and her ability to adapt to different scenarios had impressed all the instructors. Sullivan stepped forward, his earlier antagonism completely replaced by professional respect. "Lieutenant, I owe you more than an apology. I owe you my respect. What you've accomplished here is remarkable." He extended his hand, which Sarah shook firmly. "In my 15 years as a SEAL, I've never seen anyone adapt this quickly to our evaluation process. Your performance has been world-class." The other SEALs gathered around, each offering their own congratulations and expressions of respect. The woman they had initially dismissed had not only proven herself capable of meeting their standards, she had set new benchmarks for excellence. Kim approached with a broad smile. "So much for Sullivan's theory about size and capability. You've redefined what we thought was possible." Rodriguez called the group together for the final debrief. "People, what we've witnessed over the past 2 days is a reminder that excellence can come from unexpected sources. Lieutenant Chen has demonstrated that skill, dedication, and combat experience matter more than any superficial characteristics." He looked directly at Sarah. "Lieutenant, you've earned your place among the elite marksmen in the military. Your performance here will become the standard against which future candidates are measured." Sarah felt a profound sense of satisfaction, not just from the professional recognition, but from the knowledge that she had broken down barriers that might make the path easier for others who would follow. "Thank you, Chief," she replied. "This evaluation has been one of the most challenging and rewarding experiences of my career. Working alongside your team has shown me new levels of what's possible when operators push themselves to excel." As the group began to disperse, Sarah reflected on the transformation that had occurred over the past 2 days. She had arrived facing skepticism and doubt, but was leaving with the hard-earned respect of some of the military's most elite operators. Sullivan approached her one final time. "Lieutenant, I learned something important these past 2 days. I learned that my assumptions about what an elite operator looks like were wrong. You've changed how I think about capability and potential." Sarah nodded graciously. "We all have room to grow, Petty Officer Sullivan. I learned a lot from watching your team operate as well. The level of professionalism and dedication here is inspiring." Rodriguez handed Sarah her final evaluation report. "Lieutenant, this evaluation report will follow you for the rest of your career. You've established yourself as one of the premier marksmen in the military, regardless of service branch." The report detailed her exceptional performance across all categories: precision marksmanship, tactical application, decision-making under pressure, and adaptability to new environments. But more importantly, it noted her ability to earn the respect of operators who were initially skeptical of her capabilities. As Sarah prepared to leave Coronado, she knew that word of her performance would spread throughout the Special Operations community. The SEALs who had witnessed her shooting would tell the story of the small Army sniper who had redefined their expectations of what elite marksmanship looked like. But perhaps the most significant outcome was the change in perspective among the operators themselves. They had learned that excellence could come from sources they hadn't expected, and that their definition of what a warrior looked like had been unnecessarily narrow. Sarah's lethal stats, her precision shooting, tactical awareness, and combat experience had ultimately broken through barriers that had seemed insurmountable. She had proven that skill and dedication mattered more than appearance or assumptions, setting a new standard for others to follow. The laughter from the SEALs was no longer directed at her, but at their own initial misconceptions. They had learned a valuable lesson about the danger of judging capability based on superficial characteristics, and they would carry that lesson with them throughout their careers. As Sarah drove away from Coronado, she carried with her not just the satisfaction of personal achievement, but the knowledge that she had opened doors for others. The barriers she had broken down would make it easier for the next person who didn't fit the traditional image of an elite warrior to prove themselves on merit alone. Her lethal stats had indeed left them frozen in shock, not because they were intimidated, but because they had been forced to confront and abandon their own limiting assumptions about what excellence looked like. In the end, that transformation was perhaps more valuable than any individual achievement.